There are secrets that sit quietly in the corners of your heart, waiting for the day you can no longer keep them locked away. For many years I believed I would carry mine to the grave, that no one would ever hear the truth of what I endured. Yet as the seasons of life passed and I grew older within these quiet convent walls, I came to understand something important, that silence may feel safe, but silence is also heavy. It becomes a burden that crushes you from the inside until you finally dare to speak. People who meet me now see only the stillness of a woman devoted to God. They see the rhythm of prayer, the peace of service, the calm of someone who has chosen a path of faith. But what they do not see is that beneath the veil and the habit lives a woman who has known fear, shame, and unspeakable pain. They see my smile, but not the nights I have cried in secret. They see my devotion, but not the long road of suffering that brought me here. I did not come to this convent because I always dreamed of religious life. I came because the world outside had already broken me, and I had nowhere else to turn. Before I was a sister of faith, I was a wife. And the marriage that once promised me love and protection became the darkest prison of my life. My name is Evelyn Hart, and though I speak to you today as a nun, I once lived behind closed doors with a man who claimed to be my husband, yet treated me as if I were his possession. He took my trust and twisted it. He took my body and treated it without mercy. He left me bleeding not only in flesh, but in spirit. And for a long time I believed there was no escape. When I look back on those years, I can still feel the weight of silence pressing against my chest. I told myself to endure. I told myself to stay quiet, because speaking the truth felt more terrifying than the violence itself. I thought no one would believe me. I thought marriage was meant to be endured, no matter how much it tore me apart. I thought that perhaps God Himself was punishing me. But even in those moments of despair, there were small flickers of light that refused to die out. I remember kneeling at night in the small corner of my room, whispering prayers so faint that even I could barely hear them. They were not prayers of gratitude or joy. They were prayers of survival. Lord, just let me live through this night. Lord, give me strength not to collapse. Lord, if you hear me, please let there be a way out. The convent where I now live is quiet. The walls are thick. The halls echo only with footsteps and hymns. Many who visit here imagine that I have always belonged in such a place, that I must have felt called from childhood. But the truth is that my path was not shaped by longing for holiness. It was shaped by wounds, by suffering, by a desperate search for peace when peace felt impossible. To this day, there are moments when the memories return with a force so strong I feel I cannot breathe. The slamming of a door, the sharp edge of a voice, the heavy silence in the middle of the night. These are sounds and sensations that once defined my world. They remind me of the cage I lived in, a cage built not from steel but from fear and humiliation. My husband's hands were not hands of love. His words were not words of comfort. His presence was a shadow that consumed every corner of my being. I tell you this not to drown in sorrow, but to lay bare the truth. The story of how I became a nun cannot be told without the story of how I was broken first. To understand the woman I am today, you must understand the wife I once was and the suffering that pushed me to seek refuge in God. And so, I begin this testimony with trembling honesty. My marriage was not a sanctuary. It was not a partnership. It was a battlefield where I bled in silence, where my spirit was nearly extinguished. And yet within that darkness something far greater than fear was already stirring. It was the quiet whisper of faith, calling me to a place where I might one day be free. This is not merely a tale of cruelty. It is also a tale of transformation, of how even the deepest wounds can eventually lead to healing. But before you understand the peace I found in these convent walls, you must walk with me through the shadows of the life I once lived. Only then will you see why I left everything behind, why I abandoned the world of marriage, and why I chose instead to dedicate my broken but enduring heart to God. When I look back on the years before my marriage, I see a girl who believed in fairy tales. in promises spoken beneath candlelight, and in the steady comfort of family traditions. My childhood was not without its difficulties, but it was framed by faith, by church bells on Sunday mornings, and by the gentle hope that if I followed the path laid before me, happiness would follow in return. I grew up in a modest town where everyone seemed to know each other's names. Our home was small, but it carried the smells of warm bread, freshly ironed linens, and the sound of my mother's humming while she cooked. My father worked long hours, and though his hands were always rough with labor, he never failed to lift me high into the air when he returned, telling me I would reach the stars one day. As a little girl, I believed him. I believed I was safe, that goodness would always protect me. Like many young women of that time, I was taught to dream of marriage. To marry well was considered the fulfillment of a daughter's life. I imagined lace gowns, a home filled with laughter, children running through a sunny yard. I thought of a husband who would be both protector and friend, someone who would cherish me the way I had seen my father cherish my mother. I had no reason to believe life would be anything different. It was during my late teenage years that I first met the man who would become my husband. He was taller than most, with a voice that carried easily across a room and eyes that seemed at first glance to hold kindness. I still remember how he smiled at me during that first meeting, a smile that made me blush and look away. He was older, more experienced, and I felt flattered that he paid attention to me. He spoke with confidence, with a certainty that drew me in. He promised stability, respect, and a future where I would never have to worry about a thing. In those days, I was too young to understand that charm can mask danger. I was too eager to step into adulthood, too eager to believe that love had found me. My parents, seeing his good manners and steady job, approved quickly. My mother told me I was fortunate, that many girls longed for such a match. My father gave his blessing, placing his hand on my shoulder and whispering that he trusted this man to care for me. I wanted so badly to believe that they were right, that what I felt was the beginning of a beautiful life. The months leading to our wedding were filled with anticipation. There were dresses to choose, flowers to arrange, and endless conversations about our future together. I remember pressing fabric between my fingers at the seamstress's shop, dreaming of the day I would walk down the aisle. I remember writing my new name in the margins of notebooks, smiling at the thought of being called his wife. And I remember praying at night, asking God to bless the path I was stepping onto, never imagining that my prayers would one day sound so different. Our wedding day arrived with sunlight streaming through the church windows. Family gathered, voices rose in hymns, and I stood trembling at the altar in a gown my mother had sewn with careful hands. My heart raced, not with fear, but with excitement. I looked at him as he spoke his vows, his voice steady, his gaze fixed on mine. I repeated my own vows, believing every word, believing that love was binding us in front of God. When the priest declared us husband and wife, applause echoed through the church, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I was stepping into a fairy tale. But even on that day, a shadow flickered that I ignored. I recall how tightly he gripped my hand as we left the church, so tight that my fingers ached. I recall the way his smile faltered when someone else congratulated me, as though I belonged solely to him. These were small signs I brushed aside in the glow of celebration. I told myself he was simply proud, simply protective. How could I have guessed that those hands, which held me at the altar, would later strike and bruise? How could I have known that the promises whispered before God would one day turn into chains around my spirit? That evening, surrounded by family and friends, I smiled until my cheeks hurt. We danced beneath strings of lights, we cut the cake, and we posed for photographs that painted a picture of happiness. If anyone had looked closer, perhaps they might have seen my unease, the way his gaze lingered on me as though I were an object he had claimed. But no one questioned, and I did not yet understand. In the days that followed, I moved into our new home, a place I believed would be filled with laughter and warmth. I arranged the furniture, hung curtains, and placed flowers in a vase on the table. I tried to make it beautiful, tried to make it ours. I remember standing in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the floor, and thinking to myself, this is the beginning of everything. I had no way of knowing then that it was also the beginning of my undoing. The first weeks of marriage were filled with routines that seemed ordinary from the outside. I woke early to prepare meals, kept the house in order, and waited for him to return each evening. To neighbors and family who visited, we looked like any other young couple beginning their life together. Smiles were exchanged, congratulations still lingered, and no one imagined that beneath those polite gestures, something far less gentle was already beginning to stir. At first, the changes were subtle. He became particular about how I wore my hair, suggesting that I should keep it a certain way because it pleased him. He asked where I went during the day, who I spoke to, how long I lingered in the market. When I laughed too freely at a neighbor's joke, his eyes narrowed and his hand found my arm with a grip that lingered a little too long. I told myself he was simply adjusting to married life, that he was protective because he cared. But in truth, what he sought was not care. It was control. I remember one evening vividly. Dinner was late by only a few minutes because I had misjudged the time, distracted by the rhythm of stirring soup on the stove. When he entered the kitchen and noticed, his smile disappeared. The air grew heavy, and though his words were calm, there was an edge to them that made my stomach twist. "If I come home expecting dinner, it should be ready," he said. "You're my wife. That is your duty." I nodded quickly, apologizing, my hands trembling as I placed the bowl before him. It was a small moment, yet it marked the beginning of a pattern, a warning that perfection was expected, that mistakes would not be forgiven. Days turned into weeks, and his expectations multiplied. He corrected how I spoke, telling me my voice was too loud in public. He monitored my clothing, insisting I dress modestly, yet only in styles he approved. He resented when I visited my parents too often, accusing me of neglecting him. Little by little, the life I had known, the laughter of family gatherings, the warmth of my mother's embrace, the safety of my father's encouragement slipped farther from reach. My world narrowed to the walls of our house and the unpredictable moods of my husband. The first time he raised his voice, it startled me so deeply that I could not sleep for hours. He shouted, not because I had done anything truly wrong, but because I had not folded his shirts the way he liked. The sharpness of his tone pierced me more than the words themselves. I stood frozen, nodding, promising to do better next time. Later, as he lay beside me in bed, already asleep, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if this was truly what marriage was meant to be. Then came the night when the shouting turned into something heavier, when his anger moved from words to actions that crossed a line I had never imagined would be crossed within marriage. I will not recount details, for some pain is better left unnamed. What I can say is that I learned, in one terrifying instant, that my body was no longer mine, that my will no longer mattered, and that the man who had vowed to protect me had become the very source of my fear. I remember lying awake after that night, every muscle aching, tears silently soaking the pillow so he would not hear. I told myself it was an accident of temper, that stress had driven him too far, that it would not happen again. In the morning, he kissed my forehead as though nothing had occurred. His calmness was almost more chilling than the violence, for it taught me that to him, my suffering meant nothing. Weeks passed, and the cycle repeated. Apologies came rarely, and when they did, they were wrapped in excuses. "You know I work hard. You know how pressure affects me. You know you push me when you don't listen." Slowly, I began to believe his words, to wonder if perhaps it truly was my fault. I told myself I needed to be better, quieter, more obedient. If I could just perfect myself, maybe the storm inside him would quiet. But the storm did not quiet. It grew. The isolation deepened as I withdrew from those who might have noticed the change in me. My parents would ask if I was happy, and I would smile, answering with rehearsed words that betrayed nothing. Friends invited me to gatherings, but I declined, claiming I was too busy. The truth was that I no longer knew how to laugh freely, no longer knew how to speak without fear of being overheard. My world became a performance, and my role was that of a wife pretending everything was fine. Inside, I was unraveling. Nights became the worst, for in the darkness there were no distractions, no excuses to keep distance. I began to dread the sound of his footsteps approaching our room. My prayers, once whispered with hope, grew desperate. Lord, help me. Lord, I cannot bear this. Yet morning always came, and with it, the mask I wore for the world. One evening, after another of his rages, I found myself in the bathroom, gripping the sink so tightly, my knuckles turned white. My reflection stared back at me, hollow-eyed, trembling. I barely recognized the girl who had once dreamed of love and family. I thought of my wedding day, of lace and laughter, and the memory felt like a cruel joke. That was the beginning of my personal prison, a prison built not of stone, but of silence. And though I would bleed many times more, sometimes in body, always in spirit, I remained locked there, believing escape was impossible. It was only much later, after many months of this torment, that I realized silence was not safety at all. It was the very thing keeping me chained. The months that followed turned my home into a place of constant tension. From the outside, nothing seemed amiss. Neighbors still waved from their porches. Relatives still asked about our life together, and my parents still believed I was settling into marriage. But behind our closed door, the air grew heavy with an unease that never lifted. Every sound, every glance, every gesture carried weight. I learned to measure my words, to predict his moods, to walk as if on a thin layer of ice that could crack with the slightest step. His control seeped into every corner of my existence. He dictated how long I could be at the market, which friends I was allowed to see, even how I arranged the furniture in the house. He kept track of the smallest details, as though testing me, waiting for me to fail. If I misstepped, his temper erupted, sometimes in shouts, sometimes in silence so sharp it pierced more deeply than anger. The silences were often worse hours of being ignored, of having him walk past me as if I were invisible, as if I no longer existed as a person at all. I began to lose sense of who I was. Once I had been lively, eager to share stories and laughter with those around me. Now I spoke softly, carefully, always with the fear that a wrong word would set him off. My body reflected the change, too. I lost weight. My shoulders bent forward. My face grew pale. Friends noticed, asked if I was unwell. I forced a smile and said I was simply tired. In truth, I was exhausted. Exhausted from fear, from pretending, from carrying a secret I dared not reveal. The cycle of his cruelty followed a pattern that became almost predictable. It began with tension, the kind you can feel in the air before a storm. His jaw would tighten, his answers would grow short, his gaze would linger on me with dissatisfaction. Then came the explosion, words that cut, hands that left me trembling, and finally, the calm. Sometimes he apologized, sometimes he pretended nothing had happened at all. The calm was never real, only a pause before the storm gathered again. I remember one particular evening when his anger was triggered by something as small as a misplaced letter on the kitchen table. He demanded to know why I was careless, why I disrespected his order. I tried to explain, tried to calm him, but my voice only seemed to fuel his fury. That night, when it was over, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, tears pooling in my ears. I told myself I must endure, that perhaps this was my cross to bear. But in the quiet of my heart, I began to wonder if God truly intended marriage to feel like this. To the outside world, he played the role of a devoted husband. At church, he stood tall, offering handshakes and smiles. With neighbors, he was polite, even generous. People often told me how fortunate I was to have such a reliable man. Each compliment pierced me, because I knew the truth that the reliability they admired was a mask, and beneath it lived a man who chipped away at my spirit day by day. Isolation deepened. He discouraged visits to my parents, claiming they distracted me from my duties at home. When I insisted, he accompanied me, watching every interaction as though guarding a secret. Friends grew distant, not because they did not care, but because I pushed them away. I could not risk their questions, their suspicions. Silence became my shield, though it was slowly destroying me. The toll on my body grew undeniable. Headaches, stomach pains, and sudden fevers came and went. My heart raced at unexpected times. My hands trembled without reason. At night, I sometimes woke gasping, the sound of his voice echoing in my dreams even when he slept peacefully beside me. I began to dread the evenings most of all, when the house grew quiet, and I could no longer hide in chores or errands. One winter night, after weeks of tension, he struck me harder than before. I fell against the corner of a table, pain radiating through my side. For hours afterward, I lay curled on the floor, trying to breathe, telling myself I could rise, that morning would come. When I finally staggered to bed, I pressed my face into the pillow and whispered prayers into the darkness. Lord, if this is to be my life, give me strength. If this is not, show me a way out. It was the first time I admitted to myself that escape might exist. The next day, as sunlight streamed faintly through the curtains, I forced myself to rise, to prepare breakfast, to carry on as though nothing had happened. He acted as if the night before had been erased, greeting me with casual conversation, asking about the errands I would run. I smiled faintly, my ribs aching with each breath, and realized something chilling, that to him, my suffering did not matter. It was as if I were only a vessel to absorb his anger, a thing to control. From then on, I lived not in days, but in calculations. How to avoid his wrath, how to read his mood, how to shield myself without him noticing. Each moment became survival, each smile became a mask, and each prayer became a whisper that maybe, just maybe, God had not forgotten me. That whisper was all that kept me alive, even when I felt I was disappearing. There comes a time when the body can no longer carry what the spirit has been forced to bear. For months I had lived in fear, my soul shrinking under his control, my body bruised and weakened. I thought I could endure forever, that with enough silence I might survive. But survival has its limits, and mine arrived on a night that is etched into me more clearly than any other. It was late, the house dark except for a single lamp flickering in the corner. The silence was sharp, the kind that comes before something dreadful. He had returned from work in one of his moods, and I felt it immediately, the heaviness in his steps, the shortness of his voice. I tried to do everything as perfectly as I could, setting dinner just so, keeping my words soft, my eyes lowered. But perfection never existed in his world. There was always something wrong, some invisible offense for which I was guilty. That night, his temper escalated quickly. His words lashed out, cruel and cold, accusing me of neglect, of ungratefulness, of disobedience. I stood frozen, too frightened to respond, knowing that any answer might ignite him further. What followed I will not describe in detail, for some horrors do not need to be spoken aloud. But I will tell you this. When it was over, I was left on the floor of our bedroom, pain radiating through me so fiercely that I thought my very soul was breaking apart. I could feel warmth spreading beneath me, a terrifying sign that my body had been pushed beyond its limit. I remember staring at the ceiling, the edges of my vision blurring, and thinking that perhaps this was the end. Perhaps God was calling me home. And in that moment, for the first time, I did not resist the thought. Part of me longed for it. Part of me wanted the suffering to end once and for all. My lips moved in a broken prayer. Lord, if you are listening, take me now, or give me a way out. Please, just do not leave me like this. Time lost meaning as I drifted in and out of consciousness. At some point I must have fainted, because when I opened my eyes again, The room was quiet, the lamp still glowing weakly. My husband was asleep in the bed above me, as if nothing had happened. I tried to rise, but my body would not obey. Every movement sent waves of pain through me. I lay there until morning, gathering what little strength remained to drag myself to the bathroom. The mirror showed me a face I barely recognized, pale, hollow, eyes sunken and lifeless. I pressed my hands against the sink to steady myself, and for the first time, I admitted the truth I had been avoiding. I was not living. I was only enduring, and that endurance was killing me. In the days that followed, the pain did not subside. My body bled and ached, and I grew weaker with each passing hour. I tried to hide it from him, moving slowly so he would not notice, forcing a smile when he looked my way. But inside I was collapsing. Each night I prayed for strength, and each morning I woke wondering if I would survive another day. One afternoon, as I folded laundry, a wave of dizziness struck me so suddenly that I fell to my knees. The basket tipped, clothes spilling across the floor, but I could not move to gather them. I stayed there, gasping for air, clutching my side. In that moment, fear washed over me stronger than ever before, not fear of him, but fear that my life was slipping away unnoticed, that I would vanish quietly and no one would know why. It was in that moment of collapse that something within me shifted. I realized that if I continued as I was, I would not last much longer. I had always believed silence would protect me, but silence had nearly destroyed me. My prayers grew louder, no longer whispers but desperate cries. God, if you want me to live, send someone. Show me a path. Give me a hand to hold. That prayer was answered in a way I could not have predicted. A few days later, I collapsed again, this time in the kitchen. When I awoke, I was in a hospital bed, bright lights above me, the sound of voices echoing around. A nurse leaned close, her face kind, her voice calm. "You're safe," she said. "You're going to be all right." Safe. It had been so long since I had felt that word belonged to me. The doctors told me I had lost too much blood, that my body had been pushed beyond what it could handle. They asked questions I could not answer, their eyes filled with suspicion. A social worker came, her voice gentle, her presence steady. She did not press me for details, only told me that I did not have to endure alone. For the first time, I felt the faint possibility that someone believed me, even without my words. Lying there in the hospital bed, weak but alive, I began to understand that this was my breaking point. The life I had been living could not continue. If I returned unchanged, silence would swallow me whole. Something had to shift. My survival depended on it. I did not know then that the road ahead would be long and painful, that speaking the truth would shatter everything I had once known. But as I lay there, eyes closed, the rhythm of the heart monitor steady beside me, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time, the smallest spark of hope. Hope that God had not abandoned me, hope that perhaps He was leading me, step by fragile step, toward freedom. Waking in the hospital was like surfacing from deep water, gasping for air I was not sure I deserved. Bright lights stung my eyes, the sharp scent of antiseptic filled my nose, and voices murmured around me in tones I could not yet understand. My body felt heavy, pinned to the bed, every limb refusing to obey. It took time before I realized I was alive, weak, trembling, but alive. A doctor leaned over me, his expression grave. "You've been through a great deal," he said gently. "Your body is badly hurt, but we are stabilizing you now. You need to rest." I tried to nod, though the effort left me dizzy. Rest. That was all I had done for months. Rest to heal wounds, rest to gather strength, rest to endure another night of fear. Yet this rest felt different. For the first time, I was resting in a place where His footsteps could not reach me. As the hours passed, nurses came and went, adjusting tubes and checking machines. Their kindness unsettled me. They asked softly if I needed water, if I was in pain, if I felt comfortable. I did not know how to answer. I had grown so used to silence that even simple kindness felt like a language I had forgotten. Soon, questions followed. A woman introduced herself as a social worker. She had calm eyes and a steady presence that felt strangely safe. She sat at my bedside, speaking slowly, giving me space to answer. "Evelyn," she said, "we want to help you. Can you tell us what happened?" The words lodged in my throat. My lips parted, but sound would not come. I thought of his warnings, of how he said no one would believe me, of how he reminded me that a wife was meant to obey. I saw his shadow in my mind, even as I lay under the hospital's bright lights. To tell the truth felt impossible. "I fell," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "It was just an accident." Her eyes softened, but I could see she did not believe me. Still, she did not press. Instead, she placed her hand lightly on mine. "Whenever you're ready," she said, "you can tell me more. You don't have to carry this alone." Her words lingered long after she left. "You don't have to carry this alone." For months, I had believed the opposite, that I was destined to carry my suffering in silence until it destroyed me. But here was someone saying I had a choice. I could share the truth. Yet the thought terrified me. Truth would mean confrontation. Truth would mean shattering the fragile facade my family believed. Truth would mean no turning back. The next day, my parents visited. My mother's face was pale, her hands trembling as she brushed hair from my forehead. My father stood stiffly at the foot of the bed, his jaw tight, his eyes filled with questions he did not speak. They asked how I was, what had happened. Again, I lied. "I slipped," I said. "I was careless." Their eyes met, heavy with doubt, but they let my words stand. And so the silence continued. Doctors treated my wounds, nurses brought comfort, the social worker returned with her patient eyes, but I kept the truth locked inside. At night, when the ward was quiet, I pressed my palms together and whispered prayers into the darkness. "Lord, give me courage. Lord, show me how to speak." But each time I imagined the words leaving my mouth, fear closed around my throat. It was not only fear of him, though that fear ran deep. It was fear of what truth would do to the people I loved. My parents would be devastated. My family's name would be stained. Neighbors would whisper. Friends would turn away. And still, beneath all that, was a deeper fear that perhaps no one would believe me at all. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the blinds, the social worker returned. She did not begin with questions this time. Instead, she told me a story about another woman she had helped, a woman who had lived in silence for years before finally speaking. "It is never easy," she said, "but telling the truth can be the first step toward freedom." Her story cracked something inside me. Tears spilled down my cheeks before I even realized I was crying. She handed me a tissue, waiting quietly, giving me the dignity of silence. At last, my voice broke through the weight of fear. "It wasn't an accident," I whispered. The words were shaky, fragile, but they were words of truth. She leaned closer, her tone steady but never forceful. "Evelyn, can you tell me what happened?" I opened my mouth, closed it again. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might burst. At last, I shook my head. "Not yet," I said. "But it wasn't an accident." She nodded, as if that was enough for now. "That's a beginning," she said softly. "When you're ready, we'll walk through it together." That night, I lay awake thinking of her words. A beginning. I had not spoken the whole truth, but I had taken one step closer. And with that step came something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in months, I had said aloud that the pain was not my fault, that it was not merely carelessness or clumsiness. The truth had begun to breathe. In the days that followed, I found myself speaking more small fragments at first, vague phrases that hinted at the reality I could not yet fully describe. "It's not safe at home." He gets angry. "I'm afraid." Each word was a piece of the wall breaking down. Each word was a defiance against the silence that had nearly destroyed me. The doctors wrote notes. The nurses exchanged looks of quiet concern. The social worker stayed close, reminding me that I was not alone. And though fear still shadowed every word, something inside me shifted. For the first time, I began to believe that perhaps there was a way out, a way towards safety, a way toward life. Looking back now, as I sit within the convent walls, I see that moment in the hospital as the trial of my truth. Not a courtroom with judges and witnesses, but a trial within my own heart. Could I bear the shame of silence forever? Or could I risk the cost of speaking? The answer was not yet clear, but the seed had been planted. And once planted, truth has a way of growing, even in the darkest soil. The moment I whispered that my suffering was not an accident, the air around me seemed to change. Though I had not yet spoken every detail, the truth had slipped through the cracks of my silence, and nothing could contain it again. It did not take long before questions grew sharper, more direct. The doctors noted the injuries did not align with my story of falling. The social worker returned each day, her patient eyes urging me to continue. And though fear still clung to me like a second skin, I knew the time for silence was ending. It was my parents who were told first. I will never forget the look on my mother's face when the social worker asked them to sit down in that small, sterile hospital room. My father stood stiffly, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. My mother, by contrast, trembled as if bracing for a storm. When the truth began to surface, hesitant words from my lips, steadier confirmations from the staff, the storm broke indeed. My mother covered her mouth, tears spilling before I had finished speaking. "No, not him," she whispered. "Not your husband. He would never." But her voice cracked, betraying the doubt that had already entered her heart. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with anger not at me, but at the man he had once trusted with his daughter's life. He turned away, pacing the room, fists clenched, muttering words I could not hear. Their reactions tore at me in different ways. My mother's disbelief pierced like a dagger. My father's rage frightened me, even though it was not directed at me. For years I had carried this secret to protect them, to keep their world from shattering. And now, in a single moment, it shattered anyway. The days that followed were filled with chaos. My husband was confronted, his denial swift and furious. He painted me as unstable, accused me of exaggerating, of seeking pity. He told anyone who would listen that I was ungrateful, that I wanted to ruin his reputation. Some believed him. Others looked at me with uncertain eyes, caught between the man they thought they knew and the woman before them, frail and broken. Family gatherings became battlegrounds. Relatives whispered in corners, their voices sharp and full of suspicion. Some stood by me, horrified at what they heard. Others turned away, unwilling to accept that such cruelty could exist behind the closed doors of a marriage. "She must be mistaken," an aunt murmured. "She always was sensitive." "Perhaps she provoked him," another suggested. Each word was a stone added to the weight already crushing my chest. The community outside my family was no kinder. Neighbors who had once waved with smiles now looked at me with curiosity, with judgment thinly veiled as concern. Church pews that had once been places of comfort now felt like stages where I sat exposed, every glance a question, every whisper an accusation. I began to dread leaving the house, not because of his control, though that fear still lingered, but because of the eyes of others. It felt as though I was on trial not only in my own heart, but in the court of every person who thought they knew me. Yet, amid the rupture, there were glimmers of support that kept me standing. My father, though fierce in his anger, stood firmly by my side. He told anyone who doubted that his daughter's word was enough for him. My mother wavered, torn between disbelief and love, but even in her confusion, she held my hand when I wept. And the social worker, steady as a lighthouse, reminded me that truth often divides before it heals. "Not everyone will stand with you," she said softly, But that does not make your story any less real. The hardest part was seeing my husband continue his life as though nothing had happened. He carried himself with confidence, offering smiles in public, speaking to neighbors as if he were the wronged one. His ability to perform enraged me, but it also terrified me. I knew how convincing he could be, how easily others believed him. For years I had been convinced myself. How could I expect others to see what had been hidden so carefully? The weight of judgment pressed down hardest at church. I had always found comfort in the sanctuary, the familiar hymns, the glow of candles. But now, sitting in the pews, I felt only shame. I could hear the whispers faint but unmistakable. "Did you hear? She says her husband. Surely she exaggerates." Each word wrapped around me like chains. I wanted to vanish, to sink into the stone floor and disappear. Yet at the same time, something within me resisted. Why should I disappear when I had already been erased for so long? That defiance was new, fragile, but real. Perhaps it was born in the hospital bed, when I realized my silence had nearly killed me. Perhaps it was nurtured by the rare but steady voices that told me I was believed. Whatever its source, it grew. Each time I remembered that I had spoken even a fragment of truth. Each time I whispered to myself, "I am not crazy. I am not at fault." Still, the rupture left scars. Relationships I once cherished became strained beyond repair. Friends drifted away, unable or unwilling to stand in the shadow of my suffering. Some relatives refused to speak to me at all, as though my truth had contaminated them. For a long time, I grieved not only what had been done to me, but all that I lost because of it: the community, the belonging, the illusion of family unity. Yet, looking back now, I see that rupture as necessary. The truth has a way of burning through falsehood, leaving ashes where once there was pretense. Painful as it was, those ashes cleared space for something new to grow. At the time, I did not yet know what that would be. All I knew was that my life, as it had been, was gone, and the road ahead would demand more strength than I had ever imagined. It was in those days of judgment and fracture that the first whispers of another path began to reach me. I did not yet recognize it as a calling, but I felt its pull, gentle, persistent, like a hand extended in the dark. After the storm of accusations, disbelief, and judgment, I felt hollow, like a house gutted by fire. Everything familiar had been reduced to ashes. My marriage was broken, my family divided, and my community's whispers trailed me wherever I went. I tried to go about ordinary tasks, grocery shopping, walking through town, sitting quietly in church, but each action carried a heaviness. The world I once belonged to had become hostile ground. The home I had shared with my husband was no longer mine. Even after I left him, his shadow seemed to linger in every room. The walls felt suffocating, the silence oppressive. At night I lay awake, the echoes of his voice still ringing in my ears. Though he was no longer there, fear had not left me. It lived inside me now, a constant reminder that my body and spirit had been treated as something to control. I spent weeks moving between my parents' home and temporary rooms, searching for a place where I could simply breathe. My father tried to protect me, his anger burning whenever my husband's name was mentioned. My mother, though conflicted, showed her love in smaller ways, folding blankets around me, preparing tea, holding my hand when the tears returned. Yet, even in their presence, I felt a deep loneliness. They could not fully understand the emptiness I carried. One afternoon, desperate for a moment of quiet, I wandered into a small chapel I had passed many times before, but never entered. It was simple wooden pews, stained glass windows that caught the fading light, and the faint scent of incense lingering in the air. I sat in the back, hoping no one would notice me. For the first time in months, I felt the weight in my chest ease, if only slightly. The stillness of that place seeped into me like water on parched soil. A nun approached after the service, her footsteps soft against the stone floor. She did not ask questions, did not probe for answers. She simply smiled and placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "You are welcome here," she said. That was all. And yet those 4 words pierced deeper than any lecture, any sermon. You are welcome here. I had not felt welcome anywhere for so long. I began returning to that chapel, at first in secret, slipping in for a few minutes when I could no longer bear the noise of the world. The sisters who lived there noticed me, but they did not intrude. They offered nods of acknowledgement, small gestures of kindness, and space for silence. Slowly, I began to feel less like a stranger and more like someone being gently received. Their lives fascinated me. I watched as they moved through their days with a calm rhythm, prayers at dawn, meals shared in simplicity, work done without complaint. There was no shouting, no suspicion, no games of control, only order, kindness, and a sense of belonging that felt foreign to me. I wondered what it might be like to live as they did, to wake each morning without fear of footsteps echoing in anger. The idea of a convent had never crossed my mind in my younger years. I once dreamed only of marriage, of a home filled with children and laughter. But that dream had crumbled into dust, and what remained was a longing for safety, for peace, for a place where my wounds could begin to heal. The convent seemed to offer that, though I was not yet ready to imagine myself as one of them. One evening, as I lingered in the chapel after prayers, an older sister approached. She had kind eyes that seemed to see straight through the layers of pain I carried. She sat beside me in silence for a long while before speaking. "You carry a heavy burden," she said softly. "Sometimes God leads us to places where that burden can be set down." Her words stayed with me. That night I lay awake, thinking of the burden I had carried for so long: silence, shame, fear. Could it truly be set down? Could there be a place where the past did not define me, where I could begin again? I did not yet know, but for the first time, I dared to consider it. I began spending more time with the sisters, helping in small ways, tidying the chapel, preparing meals, joining in hymns even when my voice trembled. Each act was simple, but each reminded me that I was more than the pain I had endured. They never asked for explanations, never demanded that I recount my past. Instead, they welcomed me as I was, broken but still standing. The more time I spent there, the more I realized how starved I had been for gentleness. A smile offered without expectation, a hand extended without control, words spoken without cruelty. These small mercies began to stitch pieces of me back together, thread by thread. Still, doubt lingered. Was I worthy of such refuge? Could someone so fractured truly belong among women who seemed so whole? Each time I asked myself that, I remembered the sister's words. Sometimes God leads us to places where that burden can be set down. Perhaps this was where he was leading me. Looking back now, I see that those early visits to the convent were the first steps on a new path. I did not yet know that I would one day take vows, that I would stand as a sister with a new name and a new life. At that moment, all I knew was that I had found a place where peace was possible, and after everything I had endured, peace felt like a miracle. The sisters never pressured me to stay, never asked for promises or commitments. They simply opened their doors and let me enter at my own pace. That freedom itself was healing. After years of being controlled, every step I chose freely felt like a small victory. And yet, with each passing week, I found myself lingering longer at the convent, reluctant to leave its quiet walls behind. At first I told myself I was only seeking rest, but rest turned into comfort, and comfort into belonging. The sisters' rhythm of life was unlike anything I had known: prayers at dawn, meals in silence, work that was humble but filled with purpose. Their days were not free of hardship, but they were free of cruelty. I began to wonder what it might mean to truly belong here, not as a visitor, but as one of them. When I finally shared my thoughts with the older sister who had first welcomed me, she listened without interruption. When I finished, she smiled gently. "The path to becoming a sister is not easy," she said, "but if God is calling you, he will give you strength to follow." Her words both reassured and unsettled me. Was God truly calling me? Or was I simply running from the ruins of my old life? The months that followed became a test of that question. I entered a period of formation, learning the rules of the order, adjusting to the discipline of prayer and service. At times I flourished, losing myself in hymns, finding joy in simple tasks like gardening or scrubbing floors. At other times, I faltered. Memories returned unbidden, shadows of nights when I had trembled in fear. I would wake from dreams drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, his voice echoing in my ears. In those moments, I doubted everything. Could a woman so broken truly devote herself to God? The sisters never shamed me for my struggles. When I faltered, they reminded me that healing is not a straight path. One told me, "Your wounds do not disqualify you, Evelyn. They are part of the story God is rewriting through you." Those words became a lifeline, a reminder that I did not have to be perfect to belong here. As the months turned into a year, I began to notice changes within myself. My prayers shifted from desperate cries for survival to quiet conversations with God. I no longer asked only for escape, but for purpose. I began to see that the suffering I endured, though cruel and undeserved, had carved in me a deeper compassion for others. I listened differently now, noticed pain in the voices of those who came seeking comfort. My own wounds gave me a way to understand theirs. When the time came to choose whether I would take my vows, I felt both fear and certainty. Fear because vows meant permanence, a life fully given. Certainty because I knew that outside these walls, there was nothing left for me but shadows. Inside, there was peace, and perhaps even redemption. The ceremony was simple, yet it felt monumental. I stood before the altar in a plain white gown, surrounded by the sisters who had become my family. As the priest spoke, I felt the weight of years lifting, replaced by a new weight, a weight of commitment, of belonging, of surrender to a God who had never left me, even in the darkest nights. When I spoke my vows aloud, my voice trembled but did not break. Each word felt like a step out of the cage I had once lived in, a step into a freedom that was paradoxically found in surrender. When the veil was placed upon my head, tears filled my eyes. For the first time in so long, I was not defined by what had been done to me, but by the life I was choosing. After the ceremony, I walked into the chapel garden, the air fresh with the scent of flowers, the sunlight warm on my face. I breathed deeply, as though drawing in a new life. My past was not erased. It would never be erased, but it no longer held me captive. I was no longer just a broken wife, a wounded woman. I was Sister Evelyn, and my life belonged to God. Even now, years later, I remember that moment as the turning point of my existence. The world had stripped me down to nothing, but God had rebuilt me within these walls. The vows I made were not chains, they were wings. When I look back on the path that carried me here, it feels almost like a story belonging to someone else. The young girl who dreamed of love, the wife who endured cruelty in silence, the broken woman who collapsed beneath the weight of suffering at times. They seem like strangers to me, and yet I know they are all me. Each chapter, no matter how painful, has shaped the woman I am today. The convent became not only my refuge but also my school of healing. Within these walls I learned to breathe again, to trust again, to live without fear of footsteps in the night. Prayer became my anchor, guiding me through moments when memories resurfaced with sharp intensity. Service to others gave me purpose, pulling me beyond my own wounds into the lives of those who also carried hidden burdens. There are still days when the past whispers. A sound, a scent, or a phrase can transport me back to the darkness. My body remembers what my heart has long tried to release. On those days, I do not pretend the pain never existed. Instead, I hold it gently, like an old scar, and offer it back to God. I remind myself that survival itself was a miracle, that the breaking did not have the final word. The sisters often tell me they admire my strength, though I rarely see it in myself. What I see is not strength, but grace, the quiet, steady hand of God carrying me when I could not carry myself. There were countless nights when I begged for death, and yet I was spared. There were countless days when I thought silence would consume me, and yet I found my voice. That is not my doing alone. That is mercy. I sometimes meet women who come to the convent seeking comfort, their eyes shadowed by secrets they cannot yet name. I see myself in them, the trembling hands, the hesitant smiles, the weight of unspoken pain. I never push them to speak, for I remember how long it took for my own truth to rise. Instead, I offer what was once given to me: presence, kindness, and the assurance that they are welcome here. Often, that is enough to begin. In those encounters, I see the thread that ties my past to my present. What was once only suffering has become the ground of my compassion. The wounds that nearly destroyed me have become the very place where I can meet others in theirs. And in that way, even my pain has been transformed into something sacred. It would be a lie to say I no longer grieve what I lost. I lost the trust of family members who could not accept my truth. I lost years of my youth to fear and isolation. I lost the dream of marriage as a place of love and safety. But what I gained in return cannot be measured by what I left behind. I gained a peace that the world cannot take away. I gained a community that loves without condition. I gained a life not defined by violence but by faith. Now, as I write these words within the convent library, the sun streaming through stained glass, I feel a quiet certainty that sharing my story matters. I know there are others still living in silence, others who believe their suffering is invisible, others who think their pain will never be believed. To them I want to say, you are not alone. Your silence does not define you. Your wounds do not erase your worth. I cannot promise the road is easy. Telling the truth cost me dearly. It fractured my family, invited judgment, and left me exposed in ways I feared. But it also saved my life. Speaking even a fragment of truth was the first step toward freedom, and freedom was worth every cost. If you are listening to this now, carrying your own hidden burden, I want you to know that there is hope. Hope may not arrive as thunder or lightning. Sometimes it comes as a whisper, as a gentle hand on your shoulder, as a door quietly opening when you least expect it. My own hope came in a hospital room, in the kind eyes of a social worker, in the steady voices of women who showed me I was welcome. It can come for you too. I do not share these words to dwell in sorrow, but to testify that healing is possible. I am living proof that even the deepest wounds can be tended, that even a life shattered can be rebuilt. It is not quick, and it is not simple. Healing is a slow weaving, a daily choosing, a trust that God can make beauty from ashes. Today I am Sister Evelyn Hart, but I will never forget the woman I was before. Her cries echo in my prayers. Her pain shapes my compassion. Her endurance reminds me never to underestimate the strength hidden within brokenness. She is still with me, not as a chain, but as a witness to how far I have come. And so I end this testimony not in despair but in gratitude. Gratitude that God heard my cries. Gratitude that He carried me from the shadows into His light. Gratitude that I can stand now, not as a victim, but as a woman of faith, a woman of hope, a woman whose story may help another take her first step toward freedom. If you are listening, know this: the silence can be broken, the burden can be set down, and even in your darkest night, God has not abandoned you.